Even to this day, I talk to some people and they just have this mental image of you're in a dark room writing code. I'm like, that's not how it works.
Well, Noe, it's Friday, and here we are at the end of the week. Um, how's your week been going so far? You think pretty good, productive
Pretty,
week here at work?
yeah, pretty good, productive, nothing out of the ordinary. Um, yeah, nothing to complain about. I'm good to go and I'm ready for the weekend.
Yep, that's good. Me too. I mean, it's been a long week, but you know, um, speaking of productivity, I didn't know this was going to be announced yesterday, but I'm sure a lot of people, watching this podcast already know, but the Chat GPT 5 got announced yesterday, and I didn't even know it was going to come out. So I just got some notification on LinkedIn. I go out there on YouTube. I'm watching the live stream, and I've seen online a lot of the comments people are kind of putting. Like some people are blown away by it. Some people are like, well, it's not that much different than the older version. One of the things they showed was they brought up cursor. Then they, instead of having to describe what they needed coded, they just like took I think it was a Jira ticket, and then they just sort of put it in there and said, fix this issue, right? And it starts logging like what it's thinking. It says, oh, okay, I'm gonna look at the code base. I'm gonna read the issue. I'm gonna do some research online, and it took like about a minute maybe to code through everything. And one of the guys said, wow, that's amazing. It's really fast. And one of the other presenters said, yeah, how long would it have taken to work on this ticket? And he said, well, I think he said 4 days. I can't remember if it was 4 hours or 4 days, but either way, right? It just took like, minutes instead of hours or days.
Hmm.
So, it was pretty amazing. But then the one thing that like sort of popped out to me was the guy said, well, I don't really have time to work on these programming tasks anyway because I'm in meetings all day. And
Yeah.
don't you think it's kind of funny? Like, do you remember? I'm sure you remember like the old days of when you're coding, or maybe still like when you code now, like how many meetings we get stuck in all the time.
Yeah. More meetings than coding is what it seemed like the ratio was.
Yeah, I remember at some places, we've worked at that a lot of the programmers would complain, like, I don't have time to do my real job because I'm in meetings all day.
I think that's a pretty big misconception. I know I had it in college, and I bet you a lot of people not in the field have that misconception that, oh, you're a developer, you sit at your desk all day, you don't talk to anyone, you're just writing code. And when I actually got into the real world, I quickly discovered that you actually have to work with a lot of different people and have a lot of conversations in order to write that code.
Mm-hmm.
And it like we were just talking about, it's the opposite. It's like more meetings versus code. You don't know what to code until you have those meetings and you have the conversations there, which even to this day, I talk to some people and they just have this mental image of you're in a dark room writing code. I'm like, that's not how it works.
Well, that also reminded me of yeah, kind of the topic for today. It started off, I think it was you found this. I think it was you. I found this article. I'll put the link in the description for this video, this episode. Um, it was a Substack article by lady Sarah Constantine, and it's called "The Great Data Integration Schlep." Um, but reading through it, had a bunch of information about like why it's tough to kind of keep data like clean and organized. But in that, though, one of the things that stood out, linked to both of us, was she starts talking about her time at Palantir. Uh, Palantir's got a lot of you know discussions online on the news lately. But one of the things she talks about is that a lot of the work they do, like I always thought Palantir had like this system, and they probably do, like this system of automation with AI, and I'm sure they do, right? But you don't gonna know all that. But she was saying a lot of what they do to get the data cleaned up and do all this integration and stuff, right? Because a lot of what they do is integrating these systems that don't seem like you could integrate them. That it's just a lot of talking. She said there's just so many. It's almost like they're management consultants, right? Like McKinsey or maybe some people at Accenture. They just talk all the time. Um, I was a little shocked to hear that, but we worked on a lot of projects. I'm sure. I mean, it resonated with me. Did it resonate with you? Kind of her description of the real work, I guess, that happens on these big integration projects.
Yeah. As soon as I saw this article and I was reading through it, and I mean the whole concept of the AI and the data, that all makes perfect sense. But when she was really going into the human factor of what is needed to make that software successful, I was like, this this applies to everything that we do on our side as well. Like everything she was talking about is what we have to do in our projects. And I think it took a while for me, as I was working here at Sixth Street, took a while for me to figure out, like, obviously the technical skills in projects is very important, but I would say the people skills of a project team working with another, a client and their team is just as important, or maybe even slightly more important to the success of these projects. And it's painfully obvious, right? If the team isn't working well together, it's usually a hard project. And that's because not because of the skill set, it's because of the human factor, people talking to people, people getting on the same page as far as what are we building here? What does success look like?
Mm-hmm.
And we've done hundreds of projects by this point, maybe even more. I haven't counted them in a while, but it's just a factor that I don't know if everyone puts the weight behind it that they should when they're trying to decide, like, hey, who should I work with when I do this big commerce project or this big Salesforce project? It's not just can they write the code, can they configure the Salesforce environment? It's like, how are these people going to work with my people?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what really, popped out at me when I read that article.
Yeah. I mean, I know in our experience, like you said, the project sort of depends on the people working there. We've had times where, um, I guess I can say this. Our team, right? We have a pretty good team, and everyone works well together. Um, there's times we work with like a client, and things are working well, but then for some reason there's a change on their side. They bring someone new, like a new person in management or whatever, and like it would derail the whole project. And then it's like hard to bring it back, I guess, because like you said, it just takes like like a person or several, right, to kind of um, get the team out of the zone, I guess, of working.
Hmm.
Um, and and then the other thing is, but she kind of says that I don't think a lot of people don't realize that. Like, I saw on LinkedIn that someone was posting I think it was a screenshot of somebody's estimate that they gave to like another client, and like in the estimate it had like their discovery sessions was like something small, like 2 hours or 4 hours, and the rest was coding. And everyone was saying, well, how you don't know what you're coding if you don't even talk to the people, right?
Hmm.
Versus I've worked on projects. I mean, they all depend. Sometimes it's like 2 weeks of discovery, sometimes it's four. But I can tell you, I'm curious what you think, but from my perspective, the longer the discovery goes and the deeper you dive into the details, right? You start building out like those Jira tickets, for example. The more
Hmm.
details you have, once you start the actual coding part, it goes like really fast
Yeah.
most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And not only does it go fast because you've had those conversations about the requirements, but it goes fast because as you have those conversations, you start building, you start bonding as a team. You're
Mm,
having conversations, you're talking about business. Maybe you talk a little bit about, hey, what'd you do this weekend?
mm-hmm.
Um, so all that I think plays a really big factor into, how is this project going to unfold? I've actually started calling this out in sales processes and sales calls that, that we've had with potential clients where it's like, I know we can compete with everybody as far as the technical side. In fact, I would argue that we have, people that are probably much, much better than other SIs. But I think the difference maker on our side, and I've been bringing this up on calls, is you got to think about how are our teams going to work together. When we hire people, and I know we've talked about this, we don't just hire people based off of how good they are at coding or
Hmm.
how good they are at Salesforce and configuration and consulting. We, I actually put a bigger score on, do I want to work with this person? Does this person have a good personality and outlook to where you want to have conversations with them? Because, like we were just saying, most of your day is conversations with people. So you got to work well with people. And if you don't work well, well, that's just a huge, you know, hurdle that you
Hmm.
already have to get over in order to, get to the end of a project.
Yeah, it definitely makes everything more complicated. Because I feel like I'll take it to another level. Just relationships are complicated sometimes, right? So,
Yeah.
and when you work with anyone, right, if you have like a person you're in a relationship with, like romantic, or even you have a family member or a friend, and then you got colleagues, right? And then you work on projects as a consulting firm, or whatever. Just the relation part, for all sorts of reasons, everyone comes from different backgrounds, everyone has different expectations.
Hmm.
So I agree. Like, I never thought about that part. Like, that. I mean, I always saw discovery as just getting down like to every little detail. So once you start coding, you can just like blast through it all, right? Set up the system. But you're right. I think having that time to also build the relationships and the camaraderie helps. And I always tell people here, especially, well, mainly when they get hired on, um, like one of the things I think we like to do is building those relationships. When you start a meeting, don't be transactional. Don't just say, "All right, meeting starting. Let's jump right into it." Right? Always spend some time to see how everyone's doing. Ask some questions about their dog or their cat or whatever pet, or their family or their kids, and build that relationship, because eventually these projects are complicated, right? All these, like, whether it's e-commerce, digital transformation, and there's a lot of like players, on the client side, right? A lot of stakeholders. So, right, if something will, I'll say, go wrong, not that it's bad, but like, right, there'll be some sort of surprise. And
Hmm.
when you have a good relationship, right, people just roll out the punches. Oh, is that what happened? Oh, we didn't know. No problem. Let's work together to fix it. But the
Hmm.
relationship isn't there. You'll get like the brick wall, and like, why did this happen? Don't talk to me until it's fixed, or whatever. Right? Like, and that actually doesn't help. It actually, when um, I don't want to, but when other people, clients, or even other partners do that type of a response, it just makes things harder, and it causes the project to take longer. Um, I don't know why it's human nature to do that, but that's what happens.
Yeah, you actually beat me to it. That was the exact scenario I was going to bring up is that, we both do this. When we start any meeting, we usually like to start with some small talk. And there's a reason for that, right? I want to know, you know, about you. I want to know, what is it that makes you tick outside of work? And it
Hmm.
just it just kind of helps build a relationship, however small, and it grows over time. But it really does come into play as the project unfolds because there's always, peaks and valleys, things that happen, and the well-oiled machines that work together as a team are the ones that overcome it quickly, and the ones that don't really have that relationship, it it just makes it harder, to get through that, and it's just a really big factor. I mean, even on these sales calls, I'll say that, from a technical aspect, when we talk about this stuff, I don't know if I've really heard all that much that scares me. It's like I know our team can do what you're asking for from a technical aspect. It's
Hmm.
what we need to really make sure is like, make sure you pick the right partner that you can see yourself working well with. Who do you want to work with every day? Because I know it seems like a small factor, but out of all the projects we've done, there's a trend, there's a pattern that you see, and it's like if everyone works well together, it's always smooth sailing, for the most part, right? Every project's got their little bumps, but it's a whole lot easier to get through those than it is to, when you have this kind of wall between it. And it's everything we've been talking about over these weeks, right? The AI and, all this stuff. It's like that's great, but the human factor is still a major, component of all this stuff.
All these projects we've been through and the different types of clients, I can almost tell what's going to happen based on the type of client. And so because of that, we've actually not too often, but every once in a while we've like to find the right partner, right? Sometimes we'll tell in these sales conversations the actual client like, well, it's probably best you find another partner because I can just tell that our team and their team might not gel because of cultural differences. Um, and that's happened very rarely, but it happens. And then there's the ones that and like I'll just I don't certain industries, right? Or maybe certain companies are owned by conglomerates or PE firms, where like each of them might have a certain category, and this we'll talk about this like, oh, this company's functions this way, it's in this industry, so you already know like how they function going into the project, and
Hmm.
it's just really interesting how these different cultures are. Anyway, I guess that just comes with experience, back to like saying when you're in college or even younger, right? And you watch TV, you think, oh, you're just coders, you just hack away like in a dark room. No,
Hmm.
that's not how it is at all.
No, and yeah, it took me a while to finally put that all together. I had seen it enough, and I knew I was seeing it, but it didn't really crystallize for me until it's like, this. I think when it really crystallized was when I started getting involved with hiring people.
Mm.
It's like, in the past, I mean, there were times we would interview candidates, and I mean, they could probably write beautiful code, but that chemistry just wasn't there with that particular candidate and our team. And it's like, well, I understand that they can probably write fantastic code, but that's that's just not going to work, And it seems like that's a thing that now that you know it's kind of filtered throughout the company, where it's like we have to make sure that people and the relationships and the communication, that has to be priority number one. Otherwise, everything else just doesn't really gel well after that fact.
Um, in summary, what are some takeaways for the viewers today?
Yeah, I think there's three main takeaways I would walk away from this conversation. First would be, if you're a stakeholder or a decision maker for a project and you want to kick one of these initiatives off, I would strongly look into not just the skill set and the capabilities from a technical aspect of your project team, but consider those, the personality of the team, right? Whether it's an internal team only, or if you're looking outside for a partner to come in and help, your internal project, I would really look into how are these teams going to work together, because that's going to be a pretty big factor going into the entire project. Second would be, when you start the project, you know, take your time, have those conversations at the beginning, right? And obviously, the main point of those conversations is to talk through the business requirements. But I would argue even more importantly is for the team to just start bonding, right? Have a little bit of conversation outside of requirements, work through those requirements for the vast majority of the time, but that investment up front is going to pay huge dividends down the line when it comes to, actually working through the project. And
Mm-hmm.
then third would be, it takes effort, right? This is something you have to be mindful of, is to put in the effort to build those relationships. Remind yourself, remind your team, have some of these conversations, put a little bit of small talk up front, because otherwise it's very easy to just go into business mode and start working through stuff. But, again, that little investment pays pretty big dividends.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's all that's true. I think it's, when people, a lot of people when they're at work, they go into business mode, like as you just said, and so what happens is you just want to rush into like knock out some tasks or right or go jump into straight to the details of a conversation. So I think you're right. I think it does take some effort. You have to kind of remind yourself, like not to just rush into it, like take a little time to build those relationships. And so you have to be mindful of all that.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, this is great. I think yet again, this is a great conversation. I think that's all we'll talk about today. We'll keep this one kind of short. And so I just want to thank everybody who's been watching since the beginning. And, go ahead and if you haven't already, like and subscribe. And we appreciate you listening today. Thank you.
Until next time.